Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Ben and I are here to talk with you in this episode about the mysterious Men in Black phenomena. And actually, Ben is a man in black tonight, aren't you, Ben?
Yes, on purpose. I thought I would dress in black to be a man in black.
I should have done that too. I never thought about it, but anyway.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm Agent B.
Agent B. Okay, fair enough. Oh, but it really is a mysterious phenomenon associated mostly with UFO sightings and close encounters. And various people who claim to have sighted UFOs or even been abducted by aliens or experienced unaccounted for missing time, sometimes visited by men in black who are literally dressed all in black, and who discourage witnesses who repeat their claims of seeing UFOs or experiencing alien visitations, which is, I can imagine, to be quite scary, actually. So tonight, Ben and I have some cases that we're going to talk about. We've had some that were reported to us personally, and also some of the others that we've gathered from around the planet. So, now, some ufologists, and I don't care what people say, I really like that word, ufologists, but don't you, Ben?
I don't like the word at all.
I like it. I like it.
I prefer UFO researcher.
Yes, but not everyone's a researcher, you see, because some people are investigators, some people are researchers, and then some people are just deeply UFO interested people.
I think my main problem with the word is ologist implies you've done some type of training or some type of degree to become an ologist, an archaeologist, a geologist. So and generally most people who do it don't go through that process to call themselves a ufologist.
Well, which university do you go to? I mean, really?
That's the thing. There are some courses out there, I think, but no, it's not something that you do a course. That's the problem I have with the term.
Okay, well, we'll just leave that conversation for another time.
Maybe we should debate it one time in another episode.
Well, anyway, I'll continue to call them that. But anyway, let's say UFO researchers and interject it with ufologists from time to time.
Yeah.
But whoever they are, let's say UFO researchers these days often identify men in black as ultra-secret agents associated with the FBI, the CIA, or an unnamed covert federal government department who seek out to conscientiously thwart individuals probing too close to the truth behind UFOs. And some researchers even consider that men in black are actually not of this earth. But whoever they are, they threaten and harass witnesses and sometimes their families to stay quiet about their experiences or just to stop pursuing some avenue of inquiry into UFOs that those witnesses or even researchers may be following. So there's some really interesting descriptions that I'm going to give you. I think Ben might give you some too. But Men in Black descriptions range from having an Oriental or Italian or Mediterranean looking background, often with a sort of like an olivey skin. They dress in black or black clothing or dark clothing, which can sometimes be reported as being strangely wrinkle-free. And I've had someone describe that to me.
And even old-fashioned too.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, out of time.
Yep.
Yeah. And some descriptions include having unusual hair growth, as though their hair's been shaved and grown back unevenly. And sometimes they're reported as having an unusual way of walking, as if they're intoxicated, and one of the cases that I'm going to talk about is like that. Or they can appear to be gliding. And I was reading, this wasn't reported to me, but I was reading that some people have seen them wearing the seal of the United States on their lapels. So, and I know that in some cases of alien abduction experiences that were reported to me over the years, that witnesses talked about there being what we call the little grey aliens with the inverted pear-shaped heads, about 3.5 feet tall, being accompanied by what's appeared or who appeared to be US or other country military personnel with them, which is interesting in itself, isn't it?
Yeah. What's going on there?
Exactly. What is going on? And some descriptions include these men in black having unidentifiable accents, or they speak with a stammer, or if they're being harassed on the phone, it can include like hearing metallic voices on the other end of the line. And I am aware of some cases that are witnesses have occasionally reported them wearing a black cape, or they've been seen standing on the side of the road, of deserted roads actually, in the middle of nowhere, which is really strange. So there's a lot of really odd behavior and situations that are around them. And they can often show up to UFO witnesses unannounced, and quite often in groups of 3, which is interesting in itself, because I know with the alien abductees, they used to report to me anyway that these little grey aliens would always turn up in 3s as well. Did you find that? Have you found that at all?
I found that too. Yeah. I think that one of the ones I want to talk about, there was 3 of them. So
okay, yeah.
I think it is quite a common occurrence. And just one thing I want to say is I think that there's definitely the 2 types of men in black that we've discussed so far. There is the human kind, and then there is the paranormal kind, or the alien kind. So there's definitely those 2 cases where you can say, yeah, that's probably humans in that particular instance, and then there's these other strange cases where you go, well, that's definitely not a human. So I think you've got those two pathways of men in black.
Yes.
Yeah.
Perhaps like the men in black in the movie.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah.
Because I was reading of cases where witnesses were actually flashed with a bright light.
Yep.
Just like in the movie.
Yep.
But then these men in black just disappeared.
Yeah, I mean that's the film series is obviously a very light-hearted and doesn't take itself too seriously in its conception. But if you break it down, it does have some of the key elements of that phenomenon attached to it, even though it's sort of a very light-hearted and thoroughly enjoyable thing to watch. And it's 3 or 4 episodes now, so it's. And when I first started googling it, that was all that came up, was that movie series.
Okay.
I had to recalibrate the typing to get past the 3 tri-sequel movie to get to other information about it.
Yes, that's not easy.
I typed in Men in Black. No, that was no good. Men in Black UFO phenomenon, started to get some better results.
Yeah. But I often think that the writers of sci-fi movies and series actually did their homework very well, because they always had the classic elements of what we as UFO researchers have come to know, found quite familiar with. So good on them for doing that. But Men in Black have been sighted around the planet, and but mostly in Scandinavian countries, New Zealand, South Africa, and right here in Australia too. And apparently they've been active since around 1947, when UFO sightings were first becoming news items. And they became especially active when there was a large amount of UFO activity as well. So you'd have waves of UFOs being seen, which, in the early days, in the late 40s, 50s, particularly, and into the 60s, there was a lot of that going on.
Lots of flaps occurring in different
places. The flaps, yeah. But for me, I think the that I'm aware of, a lot of the Men in Black stories I heard were through the 90s from witnesses who'd seen things and they'd become almost obsessed, wanting to know what's been going on with them. So, do you want to talk about some cases that you've found, Ben?
Yeah, I can talk about one, and yeah, this one I'm going to talk about is an Australian Australian case. It also happens to be a Victorian case, which is where I'm based down here. And I sort of thought to myself, oh, when I start Googling Men in Black, I'm probably going to be in America and England and those sort of places to a certain extent. And this one sort of fell into my lap this week. So I'm kind of happy that an Australian case sort of just propelled itself forward, which was really good. And it's basically a case that occurred in March 1967 in the Melbourne suburb of, well, it was the outer of Melbourne back then. It was country back in that time, but now it's firmly entrenched in the outer Melbourne suburbs, eastern suburbs of a place called Hallam. And a young man and his sister, John Coyle and Miriam Coyle, he had bought a dollar camera from Coles, and they were going down to take some photos of trains, and they walked across this paddock down to where the train line was, and I think he took a couple of photos down there. Then it was getting dark, so they decided to come back. And so as they're walking back across the paddock after returning from what they wanted to do, this Miriam looked up in the sky and she saw this object moving towards them across the field, and it was a classic disc-shaped flying saucer. UFO, UAP, whatever you want to call it. And it saw them in the paddock, and it came down and it basically circled around the top of the two of them standing in the paddock. And John was able to take his camera out and took, I think, 6 photographs of this object at relative close range. Or the first photos are kind of from a distance, and then it comes down. And the last photo is a relatively detailed picture for the time, given it's a $1 camera from Coles in 1967. And if you Google Hallam 1967 UFO, you can see images of the photo. And so they took the pictures home, and it sort of they got processed, and they actually ended up going across to America. His original negatives was because it was regarded as a pretty good sighting. Got a lot of coverage at the time in newspapers and magazines and things around that era. And the via means the negatives ended up going to America, where they were lost. So that happens quite a lot with UFO evidence. It gets lost in the system, and he never actually got them back. But he did make prints at the time. So that was the basics of the story. And then 2 weeks after this encounter in March, he decided to go back down to where they were, and he walked back down to cross the field and down to where the trains were. And as he was coming back, he saw over on the Hallam Road a black 1950s car parked on the road. Black 1950s. This is 1967, and he instantly identified it as a 1950s old-fashioned black car parked on the road. And you could see figures inside the car. And a figure inside the car was beckoning to him to come over. So he walked over to where the car was, and he went over there, and he could see men in the car. I think it was perhaps 3 men in the car, and they were all dressed in black suits, and they kind of had the black hats, and he noticed that the skin was very pale, and he noticed that there was almost like a lipstick on the lips. So it was kind of like looked like they had something across their mouths, and very fine featured. So very pointy, fine featured facial appearances to these men in this old black car. And they basically said to him, look, you've taken photos of you've seen a UFO recently. Yes, I did. You took photos. Yep. All this publicity around it just has to stop. Basically, it's got to be gone. And he sort of arced up at that a little bit and said, well, I can do whatever I want to do. It's not like you guys can tell me what to do. And he was a bit sort of affronted by these people telling him not to show an interest in and to bury and forget about UFOs. And the other interesting thing that he said was, and that's about the story, and presumably they drove off. And he said that the interesting thing about it was, how did they know that he was going to be walking along the Hallam Road at that particular point in time across that paddock in the same location where he had seen where him and his sister Miriam had seen the disc 2 weeks earlier? How did they know that he was actually going to be there? And I think that was one of the most puzzling and perhaps perturbing things for him, was that how did they know that he was going to be standing there in Hallam, 1967, and these strange men appear and
Yeah.
presumably drive off again. So that's the Australian story that I've been able to find in the last few days, and it's a fascinating instance, because it kind of adds another dimension to this close encounter they had with an object hovering not that far above their heads, taking the photograph. That, what a great experience! And then 2 weeks later, you've got these strange guys turning up in an old black car,
Mm.
and in black.
Yeah, that's not the first time I've heard about the old-fashioned black sedans. And I remember someone years ago who called, they were in Sydney, and they said that they were walking down the street, and one of the busy streets, or main streets, I should say, and I think it was a weekend and in the afternoon, and there was this old-fashioned black car slowly driving along behind them, close to the curb, just following them. Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it, how that happens?
Yeah, how they know where you are, and you hear the other stories of people being contacted, and then next minute they're on your doorstep.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah,
Bizarre.
and that leads me to a case. One of the cases I was going to talk about then was in 1994. I was contacted by a man living in a cottage on the back of an acreage property on the outskirts of the western suburbs of Brisbane. And the property owner lived on the property too, in a separate house. And the witness who called me lived in a small cottage which at the back of the property, which had a dry creek bed. It was usually dry creek bed running behind that cottage. And anyway, when he called me, he said that he had seen a small red light slowly making its way towards his cottage, and then it descended to follow the creek, or the creek bed, I should say. And so he lost sight of it as it went down into the creek bed and it traveled low along the creek. Anyway, so he told me about that sighting, and then within minutes of him finishing his call to me, he was visited by two strange men who did just like you said. They rocked up at his door. They were dressed in dark clothing, wearing sunglasses. They were both Scandinavian looking, with platinum blonde hair, and they acted as if they were intoxicated. And and he said these bozos just, pushed into my place and started sort of harassing him. And what they didn't know was that he was a retired military man. So, and he claimed to be a retired Green Beret military man too. So he very quickly threw them out of his property, out of his home. But he said the intimidation was just their strange behavior, just sort of, bobbing around. And I've read this in other cases too, sort of like from side to side, and as if they're intoxicated. But anyway, the rest of the story is that soon after he called me, soon after that experience, he called me again on the same evening, actually, to make allegations towards me that I was working with those men in black, because he didn't understand how they could know where he lived, and how they could have gotten there so quickly after he'd been on the phone to me.
He thought that you've disclosed that information to the.
Yes. And I said to him, well, I don't know how I could have done that, because you never told me your name. I don't have a phone that shows a number. This is back in the 90s.
Yeah.
I didn't have a phone that showed the number that calls. And I said, perhaps the light was already being tracked by the RAAF. or by some covert group. And they were already in the area when it came down, and they, tracked it down to the back of the property where he was living. So he sort of calmed down after a while about that. And he said, oh, I suppose that could happen, But anyway, that was one where they just rocked up on his door immediately after he had called me to tell me about his own sighting. Now, the sighting itself wasn't that incredible. It was just a small red light that had come down on the back of the property and disappeared along the creek bed. But maybe it had more significance than both he and I realised,
Yeah, for what the object was, or, some type of meaning like that.
Yeah, it was very, very strange experience, very strange. But it sort of catalysed his interest, and he got quite involved in the subject for a while, and I lost contact with him. But and there was another case where like during the 1990s, I had a lot of people coming forward with alien abduction experiences and telling me about what was happening. And they would often say that they'd feel like they were being watched. And one was a young woman who had close encounters and her whole life, and her father had experienced them too. Anyway, she worked as a freelance writer, and she'd volunteered her time to help with the administration of the organisation, help us with our mail outs and all those things, as we did in those days when we still had letters. And she also volunteered to write a short column for the association's journal. So this particular day, she'd planned to visit my home in the morning around 10 a.m., but she never showed at the planned time. Now, we're sort of sitting there going, I wonder where she is, what's happening, we're getting on with the work, etc. I think we had a working bee that day. But coincidentally, on the same day and at the same time, a journalist arrived who we'd already booked in. He arrived to conduct an interview about UFOs. And the interview was completed, but the young woman still didn't arrive. But sometime after noon, she finally did. And when asked where she'd been, she said the last thing she remembered was walking towards the front door with the car keys in her hand. And the next thing she remembered was finding herself on the floor 2 hours later. Now, she had no history of illness, and she wasn't aware of any health problems. She wasn't an epileptic, and she didn't have she wasn't aware of any problems that would make her lose consciousness. But curiously, the woman had been reporting to me prior to this experience that since she'd contacted our association and volunteered her help, a black van had parked itself continuously outside her neighbour's house, out the front on the street. And she'd seen people sitting in the van, but had never seen anyone leave the van. So I thought that was very interesting. She stayed in touch with our association, wrote a few columns, and then for one reason or another, she either moved or I don't really know. I can't remember what happened. It was too long ago, but
lost contact.
Yeah, lost contact. But it was a very strange situation, which we often found ourselves around with witnesses. They'd have these strange experiences, and somehow we'd get involved with that because they'd come forward and tell us about it.
Yeah, being involved in it from a later time period, from sort of 2010 onwards, I didn't have any reports of men in black coming in at all. Like, just in the time of investigation, I can't recall anyone talking to me about that aspect of the phenomena. But yeah, maybe it was related to a time and place, decades as well. Outside of what you'd call, I'm talking about the paranormal side of it, not the actual government authorities.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to sort of to see that, in latter times, I haven't had anything like that appear.
Well, I didn't meet the gentleman face to face who called me, but I did meet this young woman and spent quite a bit of time with her, and she seemed perfectly rational, because a lot of people who come forward, I've first of all, I've got to collect my thoughts and just put my skeptical doubter's hat aside and just make room for them to tell their story. I automatically go into Okay, let's listen to what
Yeah.
you got to say. Like, because I have heard some stories which are pretty out there. That doesn't mean to say they're not true, but it doesn't mean to say that they are either.
Yeah.
So, and this field of research does attract characters, shall we say,
And
some with mental health problems.
and they can bombard you with stuff for a long
Long
time.
time.
That once you've figured out that it's not what you think or hope it is, you've still got to deal with them.
Yes,
Which
yeah.
is part of that. We've spoken about that before, whether you take someone on or not.
Exactly.
The risks.
Yeah. And there was one more case. It was reported to me in the 90s, but it actually occurred sometime, I think it was about 73 or something. And I think I might have spoken about this before, but for those who are joining us for the first time, I'll just briefly recap. It was I think it was in a Queensland country town, central Queensland country town. Can't quite remember whether it was Chinchilla, Cunnamulla, and one of those country towns in Queensland. They all start with C. But anyway, Childers, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, and it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. There was a group of young teenage boys. Well, they weren't that young. They're old. Some of them were old enough to drive motorbikes and cars. And they were standing outside the main witness who called me to report it, standing outside his grandmother's house where he lived about 3 o'clock in the morning. They're all yahooing and carrying on and having a whale of a time, I'm sure, as young men do. And that's when they saw this green light go across the sky, and it stopped, and then it dropped vertically down to the ground. And as it did, it lit up the place like daylight. And anyway, so the boys went out, got in their vehicles, went out to where it came down to a place they estimated was near 10 Mile, and to get to, see what on earth it was. And when they got there, the police were there and they told them to go away. So they had to, but later on, they went back, and they found that there was a circular mark on the ground, and there was I think there was some burnt trees or burn mark on the ground. I think it was. That's right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't have my notes here, but
Yeah.
but anyway, and then when they went back a later time again, all that area had been graded, so all signs of whatever it was with this circular mark had disappeared. But over the next few days, when it initially occurred, the local constable, who was a friend of one of the boys, they used to go fishing together, he came to the door with two men in suits. Now, I don't think they were in black, but they were certainly in suits, and they were human looking, definitely. And they told this main witness, particularly, to not talk about what they'd seen. It didn't happen, etc., etc. And basically scared the heck out of him, intimidated him, and told him to forget it, and threatened him, really.
Yeah.
And they did that to each of the other boys too. So that was another case of witnesses being intimidated to not speak about what they had seen. Now, whether that was a UFO or whether it was, which I've sometimes thought now on reflection, that was some sort of strange or some sort of experiment that had gone wrong, I don't know. Some sort of military experiment, perhaps, that had come down and it shouldn't have. I really don't know. You don't know these things, do you?
No, we don't. The one thing I wonder about in Australia is how much military research do we actually do?
Yeah.
We're not major suppliers of military hardware, and obviously we can be involved in the plans of America and England and that over the years and their various exercises and whatever they're doing. But Australia itself as a tester of things, yes, they had rockets in Woomera and things like that, but I'm not saying that they didn't, or that I'm just saying that I just don't know.
Yeah.
What to the extent was the testing that we did here?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
you just don't know.
Yeah, I've just thought of another little side thing that popped into my head while we're talking about it. Ron Sullivan, who had the bending headlights case in 1966, just before the Westall incident. Brief version: driving along the road, sees this diamond-shaped or ice cream-shaped thing with all these lights traveling between it. His headlights are pulled towards the actual object. He puts the brakes on and narrowly avoids missing a tree. The whole thing closes up and takes off. That's the basics of it. He'd been spoken to by the Air Force. They'd come out and, group commander such and such, and, lieutenant such and such came and made a point to talk to him. And then many years later, two other men turned up in suits, and they were completely different. They'd made an appointment to come and see him as well. They were allegedly from a government department, and they brought a book in with them, and they opened the book up and they said to him, "Which one is it, Mr. Sullivan?" And in the book, there was all these pictures of different UFO shapes and styles, and just think of a picture of all the different UFO types. And they're basically trying to get him to look in this book and choose which one did you see? Bang, and then basically they didn't hang around that long. He never heard back from them, and off they went, which I thought was interesting as another sort of a example of perhaps government men talking to him.
Yeah.
Why they did it, I think he said it was like 12 years later. These guys turned up, and it's like strange. So
yeah, it just reminded me too. Sometime in the 90s, I can't remember, would have been very early 90s. There were three of us there was a gentleman out at Lightning Ridge in northern New South Wales, I think it is, well known for opal mining. And his name was Bruce Cummings. He's not with us anymore. He used to run the Lightning Ridge UFO Watch. And he was a lovely man, used to call me quite often and give me a report on what was happening out there. And he would report on all sorts of things, like one particular case I remember was where witnesses had seen a UFO come down and beings get out and collect things on the ground, which was interesting.
Yeah.
And anyway, we went out there and spent, I think it was about, had to drive all the way there and drive all the way back, of course. So I think it was about a 4-day trip. We spent one afternoon giving presentations, and then the next day, I think it was, we did interviews, people who'd had experiences. And I have to tell you, those days, I don't think they'd happen now, but we had about 20 people lined up between the three of us who wanted to come and tell us about their experiences, so we would document it. But anyway, so it was certainly an interesting time in my life. But while we were gone, I received a call from my mother, who'd been contacted by the police that my house had been broken into.
Oh.
So it was the only time that it had ever been broken into was while I was gone to this UFO group to give a presentation and to interview witnesses. And I thought, how bizarre is that? Is that coincidence? I don't know. But anyway, it was always something that just sort of stayed in my mind.
It is strange, isn't it? Yeah.
The timing is interesting. People get broken into all the time. Well,
yeah,
that's the only time I've been broken into. But
anything missing?
No, that was the thing. Nothing.
Yeah. It wasn't like it was just a couple of meth heads breaking in there and
it could have been.
Yeah,
but it was just it was like the place had been searched, because everything that was in the linen cupboard was pulled out. And everything that was in drawers the drawers were pulled out and things like that. So, I mean, the police put it down to teenagers, which it could very well have been, but it was odd that teenagers would go through a linen cupboard.
Looking for the booze, no doubt.
In the cupboard, of course. Where else? I don't know.
Well, that's interesting too, because I sort of wanted to have a little quick discussion about infiltration. So, I think in groups at different times, there's people that turn up to groups in groups, people come and go. That's a fact of life with groups, with UFO groups. And, I can remember in the group that I used to be involved in, that we had a guy who would come and turn up occasionally. He would not come to every meeting, but he'd turn up occasionally. And he seemed to have an awful great amount of knowledge about UFOs and all sorts of deep state sort of stuff, and he would only ever turn up. I probably saw him maybe 3 times in nearly 10 years, and you never knew when he was going to turn up. And he'd sort of get in the group, and he'd sort of I'm in the group, I'm in the group, I'm in the group. And you wouldn't see him for ages. And he'd come back, oh, I'm in the group, I'm in the group. And off he went again. And I just sort of had this feeling that if ever there was going to be someone who was infiltrating our group to see what we were doing or what was going on, it seemed like a good candidate for that. Something that we're always aware of, that it's, and that's without being paranoid. Like, like there's absolutely no paranoia about what I do or what any of us do. I don't think that we are seriously interesting to the governments on any real level. But I think they at least maybe know who you are and perhaps do come by and have a look. So, and that's assuming it's governments, like, which I think it would be definitely a human being, or a very good copy.
Yes.
And yeah, I don't know whether you've had any experiences like that at all over.
Yeah, definitely.
You've had people that have come and you've thought, well, is this guy here genuinely? Is he got another agenda? Is he from an organisation?
Yes. Well, since I've been involved with UFO Research Queensland, we had a conference in 1996, 97, 2001, 2003, and 2006, which wore us all out. So we haven't had any more since.
Understandable, yeah.
Yes, but yeah, but there were always people who we never knew who would turn up, two men, sit in the back row. And on one particular occasion, I took notice of what they were wearing, and they didn't talk to anybody else. They were just there observing. And I think from memory, these particular guys, they had boots, denim jeans, a shirt and a black leather jacket, and they just sat there with their legs stretched out in front of them and their arms crossed, and they just watched the whole proceedings of what was going on, what was being said. And yes, I think you're right that UFO organizations, I think they watch those types of organizations purely because they're hubs, and you can have terrorists infiltrate those sorts of groups and utilize them to their own advantage, right?
Yeah. Unbelievably, yeah.
Yeah, but so they do keep an eye on the group, I think, from time to time. If there's anything going on that say ASIO is concerned about, they will probably send out feelers and, just check it out, basically. But I do know for a fact that we were, the UFO Research Queensland, in the 60s, I think it was, when it was called the Queensland Flying Saucer Research Bureau, was infiltrated by ASIO. And there was a member of ASIO who became part of the group, an active member, because one of the senior committee members was communicating with someone from Russia in the days where we would send letters exchanging information. So the group was being watched. But as it turned out, it was quite innocuous, and they were just exchanging UFO information and basically saying, what's going on in Russia, what's going on in Australia, and those sorts of things, which, for national security reasons could be very important to a group like ASIO,
Yeah, at that time, yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, at that time, yeah. So, yes, and I expect that other UFO organizations over the years have been infiltrated at various times for various reasons, some that we're not even aware of. By these intelligence groups.
Yeah, I just want to link into what you said there about having these guys that you noticed at a meeting, and I had the exact same thing at a couple of conferences in Melbourne too. We had these people turn up who almost didn't seem interested. Like they were there, they were kind of disruptive. Okay. They were noisy, right? And they wouldn't stay for very long. Like they'd sit down, look, watch, talk quite loudly between themselves, and people are kind of like, pisting all around them, and dressed in boots and like similar sort of attire, sort of thing, almost tradie looking in some ways, right? Looked like they're in the wrong place, And this is to events where you had to buy a ticket online to come to this specific event at a library or wherever it is. So it's not like it's in a real place where a lot of people are likely to turn up unless you had direct information with a ticket to get in the door to turn up. come inside the event, disrupt it disrupt it to the point where it would almost be the point where you'd be, guys, can you just keep it down? Like, almost to that point, and then get up and leave. And that happened a couple of times.
Mm.
And we were aware of that happening, that there's these either disruptors or and then other people like that would come in and sit down and look and stare and all that sort of stuff, and then get up and go. So it just didn't seem like they were there for the show, there to listen to whoever the speaker was and be absorbed and interested by it. They gave off this energy that was the total opposite of that.
Yes, yes.
Mystery as to why they're even there in the first place.
Yeah. And we same happened with us one time. I can remember. Was a woman. We were running an investigator course over a weekend, and a woman came along, paid her money, but she was very disruptive and so disruptive to the group that we actually had to ask her to leave and accompany her off the site. That's how bad she was.
Yeah. And when we had Richard Downunder in Australia, which was advertised and relatively big thing, and Hawthorne Library in the centre of Melbourne, leafy suburbs, and this woman comes in to Richard Downunder talk, and she's sitting there and she's huffing and crossing her arms and crossing her legs and huffing, looking like she's got a bus to catch, right? And she gets up in the middle of Richard's talk, and she sort of goes, "Oh, this is not what I thought it was. I had enough of this," and she walked out. And it was incredibly rude, and we're a bit embarrassed by it. Like, we're also like, this is an international speaker, and we're kind of got this sort of crap going on.
Yes.
And so you wonder what these disruptors, these men in black, I'm trying to link, this is all linking to
yes.
This is not off topic per se.
No.
But when you're having these public events and these things, you get these people that come along that seem to be entirely there as agitators.
Yes.
Disruptors and agitators, and on the lesser level, really.
Yes, I agree. And that when it's like an individual who has an ego problem, as opposed to people who are just there observing.
Yes.
Just observing. And so I understand why witnesses are aware that, or report that they're being watched, because we know that our conferences and some events are being watched, and you'll have people who turn up out of the blue. You've never seen them before. Never. And you go to talk to them, and they sort of avoid you, and they hang back, and they hang at the back of the room, and they don't talk to anybody else. And fair enough, they may just be there just checking us out to see what the group's like, and maybe they've had an experience and they're deciding, will I report to this group or will I not, which I had someone on the phone today asking me, giving me the third degree.
Yeah, giving him the third degree, yeah.
Yeah, so, I can understand why people are hesitant, but I can also, substantiate that it happens to UFO organisations as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I saw it over 10 odd years that it was a pattern. It wasn't like you just have one event and there was an occasional troublemaker, but there seemed to be one at every event.
Yes.
Or people that were there with seemingly not there to participate.
Yes. Yes.
Buy a ticket if you're not there to genuinely come and watch the speaker and learn and be involved in it. Why would you go there to disrupt, to make people uncomfortable, almost be ejected from the building?
Yeah.
And which you've had that experience. So it's tied in. It is kind of tied in.
It is. It's about intimidation.
Intimidation, yeah. And who's to say these people? I'm not getting paranoid here, but
yes, you are. No, you're not.
I'm probably getting paranoid, but who's to say that these people are? They could be from those organisations. You wouldn't just know. They're not all in suits, So the suits are just the classic incarnation of what you'd consider to be a man in black.
Yes. Now you've just prompted my memory too, because I remember we had a woman who came to one of our meetings during the 90s. Oh, God, it all happened in the 90s, didn't it? But we were having our meetings in the city, but it was an old building on a property near the train line. And it was on acreage, actually. So the cars were parked quite a distance away from the building where the meeting was. And it wasn't well lit. So when people would leave, they were sort of walking in the dark towards their cars. But this one particular time, actually there were two occasions where a woman who came to our meeting said the last time she was there that she was followed to her car, and then the car followed her out of the property and for a distance. Now, that could have been some strange male who just decided he liked her, and but from that moment on, we made sure that she was accompanied by two men to her vehicle for quite a while, actually, as when she was leaving, and other women too. They would be, groups of the men in our group would walk the women to their cars just to make sure they got there safely. But, I have had witnesses talk about being followed by strange cars, and certainly these classic black sedans, that seem to be out of time. They should really be at a collector's car rally or something, and they're just following witnesses around. It's very strange.
I think you need to get a good look at the plates when you see these cars. Like, unless it's got club weekend plates, or it's got current Victorian/Queensland registration. What plates do they have on these cars that seemingly appear out of the blue and then disappear out of the blue as well?
Yeah.
So, I have the classic image of the wheels turning into jets and they take off into the sky.
Well, not only are witnesses intimidated, but they also have other strange things going on. And I just wanted to quickly talk about a case going back. It's a well-known case, actually, goes back. It's one of the early Men in Black reports from 1953 by a man called Albert Bender from Connecticut, who was, among other things, he had an interest in UFOs. And he had an interest in paranormal plus UFOs. And in so much so that in 1952 he formed the International Flying Saucer Bureau. But anyway, no sooner had Bender formed the IFSB that strange experiences began to plague his life. And so he ended up having ill health. He'd have strange phone calls. He received telepathic messages, or so he reported. He had feelings of being watched, which are things that we've been talking about, but all of which coincided with an outbreak of UFO sightings over southern Connecticut, which is where he was located. Now, on one occasion in November of 52, Bender was at a local movie theatre when he saw a strange man with glowing eyes observing him, and we haven't talked about that yet. On another occasion, when he was walking home, he was shadowed by someone following him, just like these vehicles that shadow witnesses as they're walking along the street. On yet another occasion, late one night, he reported he was telepathically hypnotized and levitated. But the worst experience, he said, was when because he used to live on the third floor of his, I think it was his stepfather's home. So he lived in the attic, an attic room. And one particular occasion, there was a stench of burning sulfur that filled this area of the house. But over time, and this is an interesting part, Bender believed that he discovered where aliens came from, and he wrote a letter about it to a friend. And after he mailed the letter, 3 men dressed in black suits visited him, and one had Bender's letter in hand. And after that visit, Bender became ill, and a friend described him as acting like he'd been lobotomized and suffered severe headaches, which Bender believed were controlled by the Men in Black. And he said if he thought about revealing any information, he'd be hit with this sort of debilitating headache. So eventually he did drop his UFO and related pursuits. But, those strange headaches, I had witnesses who'd report close encounters, and I'm talking about particularly alien abduction experiences, but they try to remember information, or they would have by then, by the time they get to us, they've already tried to have hypnotherapy for memory recall with their missing time, etc. But there was a lot of talk, particularly by Bud Hopkins, of a block in their memory. Like they could be hypnotized to a certain point, but that would be it. It just couldn't go past that. It'd just be a blank slate. And they'd also have, when they wanted to talk about their experiences, they'd feel compelled to shut up. Or if they thought about having their experience, talking about their experiences, they'd get these headaches. So I find, a lot of things that Bender talks about, people have reported all these decades later.
Maybe he did get close to some home truths potentially. Maybe he did. Yeah, I got another one that's just a short one. That's interesting as a kind of a roundout, slightly different to what we've been talking about. Now, this one is an American one as well. And one encounter involved a strange man in a black suit at a restaurant in Kansas City. This is Max's Kansas City, New York. And the waitress saw that a very sickly looking man with black hair in a bowl cut. He had very long tapering fingers and eyes that seemed to bulge out of his head, as if he had a thyroid disease. And the pale man sat down and decided to order something. And what will you have? Asked the waitress. Food, he replied. Yes, what kind of food, though? Asked the waitress. And it became clear that he didn't even know what food was. And for some reason, he couldn't even read the menu. Eventually, she offered him a steak, which he accepted. And when the food came out, he looked around the room to see how other people were eating. And then it became clear that he didn't know how to use eating utensils. And the man struggled with his steak and managed to eat some. And curiously, he got the best of the waitress, who decided to ask him where he was from. And he replied, another world. So that's it. That's just a short little vignette of a strange man turning up in a New York restaurant. Seemingly unable to understand what was going on. I mean, you could explain that potentially in other ways too, but interesting.
Yeah, and you've just prompted my memory. I'm going to dig things out of my memory. But again, back in the 90s, well-known UFO personality at the time in Brisbane, Glenys Mackay, who ran international symposiums in Brisbane. And Glenys is still with us, and she's a lovely lady, but she's no longer doing that now. But she held an event in a hall where there were two of us who went. Now, I'm just going on memory now, but and after the presentations, which were to do with UFOs and things, we were having something to eat. I can't remember whether we brought the food or everyone brought the food or it was supplied, but we were standing around the table and it was all on the table and it was help yourself. Now, there was this very tall gentleman, very slim, with white platinum blonde hair and unusual eyes, I have to say. And it was the middle of summer, and he was dressed in motorbike gear. So he had black leather pants, black leather coat, never took it off, wasn't perspiring. The hall wasn't air conditioned. It was just ceiling fans. We're all going, oh, it's so hot, it's so hot. And he's just standing there cool as a cucumber.
Yeah.
And at the table, now I didn't actually see this, Glenys saw this, but he's looking at the food as if he doesn't know what it is. Like he's seen food the first time. And he picks up a boiled egg and he looks at it like this, like,
like with
curiosity to him,
Yeah.
Anyway, I didn't pay much attention at the time, but before we knew it, he was gone. And we knew he'd turned up on a motorbike, but there was no motorbike sound. He was just gone, which is very strange. Yeah.
Another strange incident.
Yes. So, there's these sort of really weird stories around the witnesses and UFO events.
Events as well. Yeah, not just UFO sightings.
No.
Any UFO event, there's always some level of strangeness or strange activity.
Yep.
That's why
weird. It's just weird.
Yeah, exactly. It is.
Sorry, you want to say?
Oh yeah, I just said like this strangeness that comes out of the strangeness. So it's
Yeah,
all strange enough as it is, but
yeah,
this man and this bloke in the restaurant in New York and all these other people we've been talking about, and these are just beyond what you'd call quirky people.
yes,
you
yeah,
know, and UFO phenomenon attracts quirky people and
it does.
artistic people, and it has a certain amount of it pulls a certain type of people into it. Uh,
Mm,
but you do notice when there's someone who's not what you would say is part of the crowd.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
Well, that's it, folks. That's our episode on Men in Black. I'm sure it's given you something to think about.
Yeah.
And but if you enjoyed this episode, please like it. And if you want to hear more, remember to subscribe, tap the bell so you get the notifications when new episodes are posted. And now, Ben, you want to tell us about your radio show?
Oh,
Where can people hear it and what's coming up?
yes. So I have a radio show on an American network, which is called UNX Network, UNX Network. And it basically has a whole host of shows on it with people covering all sorts of different topics. There's UFOs, there's ghosts, there's cryptids, and I think I'm the only international on this particular network. Everybody else is based in America. I think they used to have a Korean show, but I think at the moment I'm the only international presenter on there. So my show is called Unexplained Phenomena Australia, and you can basically tune into it by YouTube. So go on to the UNX network page, and the videos you can watch the videos live. And if you subscribe to their Facebook page as well, you can watch them live. And my show streams at 9 a.m. on Thursdays, which is 7 p.m. Eastern American time. And so I'm doing a show upcoming about Fernvale, which is another strange incident that occurred in New South Wales in the 1970s. No, sorry, 1970s, 1927. Wrong decade. 1927. A really interesting case about that's coming up. I've just done the Kempsey case, three-part episode on, or 3 episodes on the Kempsey flap. Have a couple of guests from time to time as well. And I don't just talk UFOs, talk about all aspects of paranormal. So you can chase me up there.
Great, great. All right, folks. Well, that's it from us for another fortnight. We're a little bit slow this time. It was 3 weeks before since a previous episode, but life gets busy.
Yeah, life gets busy. That's all you can put it down to.
Yeah, so we'll see you next time. And until then, stay safe and be well.
Cheers.
Bye for now.
Bye.